Hello, and welcome to Religion and Life. I'm your host, Ozzie Oswalt. Religion often brings comfort to people in distressing situations, particularly during periods of death, dying, and bereavement. More and more people now are also seeking the services of end-of-life doulas when they're facing death or dying. And these doulas can bring great comfort and solace to people during the process of death and dying. My guests today, Dr. Amy Dellinger-Page and Dr. Jonelle Hussain, are working with end-of-life doulas in their research and are here to help us understand the work that these doulas do and the service they provide for our communities. Welcome, Dr. Page and Dr. Hussain. Thank you for coming back. This is your second time on Religion and Life, and I appreciate you returning to pick up where we left off last time.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so just to review, perhaps you can tell us briefly what a doula is, particularly an end-of-life doula, and the type of services they provide, and then we can delve into some of these questions that we didn't get to last time.
Do you want to start, Jonah?
Sure. End-of-life doulas work with dying patients and their family members to create what many doulas refer to as a good death, meaning a death that focuses on the particular needs or desires of the dying person. Doulas work with patients in a variety of settings, including hospitals or hospice or at home, in other types, nursing home facilities. And they work with patients and their families to create a peaceful and calming environment for people who are actively dying.
That phrase already, I mean, it's almost jarring to hear you use a phrase like good death. We're not accustomed, I think in our culture, we tend to practice denial when it comes to death and dying. So to say that in itself, I guess, points the way toward a different kind of philosophy toward approaching the process of death and dying.
I think that is true. And for end-of-life doulas and their patients or their clients, the idea is to create an environment that supports the dying person. In our culture, we don't talk about death. And so the work that end-of-life doulas do is quite different because they're taking their clients through a series of steps to identify what's most important to them, the family relationships that are important to them, how they want to be remembered, and to name those things, whether it's music or poems or scripture or anything, paintings that bring the dying person comfort.
So this takes a bit of planning with the person ahead of time, right? I mean, I'm guessing that this is something that the person who has accepted the fact that they're toward the end of life, they would seek out the services of a doula and plan this kind of way they want to be at the end of life. Is that right? I mean,
in many cases, yes. In other cases, end-of-life doulas come in at the very end. And so, of course, they're very limited in terms of what they can do. In many cases, their clients may no longer be verbal. So trying to work with family members to bring the dying person or create a peaceful environment so that death is not as frightening or uncomfortable as it might be in other circumstances. Amy,
I think it's one of the challenges that a lot of our doulas that we spoke with discussed, and that's the idea that in our culture we do have a really difficult time talking about death. We set it up as as a confrontational process almost, right? Death is something not that is a natural part of life, but it's set up as, a lot of our doulas talked about, like, it's set up as a battle that you need to win or lose, rather than it just being a natural evolution of organic life, right? I mean, it's just a process. And our doulas really wanted to, and I think end of life doulas in general, they want to work with dying persons really early on, because that's the time that you can develop a legacy project, and you can do a meaningful life review, and you can make plans and take your time for setting up your affairs, not just wills and paperwork, but also, what do you want the end of your life to look like? What do you want in those last few days? Do you want certain people around you? Do you want, some people want to have services, like remembrance services, prior to their death, so that they can be part of that experience. And so they can outline what kind of music they want as part of that celebration. And so I think that's the ideal, but so many people are unaware of end of life doulas that the actuality is much more like what Jonelle talked about, where end of life doulas are sought out much closer to an active dying process. And so there isn't time for that life review, and there isn't time for the detailed plans that they may want to enact. So that's kind of the challenge, is to get more information and education out there so that people are aware of the services.
A couple of things you mentioned, Amy, I want to follow up on, and return to this idea of a meaningful end of life review. But you mentioned that some people actually like to have a celebration prior to their passing. And it reminded me of a friend of mine who is suffering from cancer planned a "I'm not dead yet" party. And the idea was to gather all of his friends and family and just celebrate with them while he was still living. So that's reminded me when you said that some people actually like to have those celebrations ahead of time. Let me ask you this: is this our culture's kind of avoidance of the topic of death? Is that a 20th century phenomenon, or is it something that is been around for longer than that? It seems to me that maybe with the kind of funeral industry that arose in the 20th century, that might have moved death out of the home into another environment, and maybe that's behind some of our uneasiness with confronting death.
I think that's part of it, along with, we have a lot of medical advances that are amazing and wonderful and can sustain a really good quality of life to a certain point. I think the problem comes in where there's a push to be younger or to look younger. Again, like not honoring sort of the natural processes that take place. And I think the birth doula movement, I mean, had a similar sort of phenomenon. We started medicalizing the process of birth, which moved us away from natural births. And we've had the same sort of experience with the process of death. And so I don't blame the funeral industry at all. I think it was a combination of factors, moving into cities, right, and not having sort of removing this process or being further away from family, which makes it harder to then tend to the dying at end of life. People being uncomfortable with grief or becoming more uncomfortable with grief, the more we had medical advances that could prolong things, which again, I think set up this kind of confrontational dynamic or negative dynamic.
Right.
Well, and I mean, one of the issues is that when you're talking about the medical community, they are in the business of prolonging life. And so what end of life doulas, they're coming in and saying that's all well and good, but at some point we've got a person who's dying, and let's let them experience the best possible death.
Yeah, so I guess in some ways it sounds like that you're talking about this confrontational model. So it's not just between the person who's dying and trying to stay alive or trying to stay younger, but also between the medical community and the end of life community. There can be some conflicts there. And I would imagine that sometimes you would run into medical professionals who have a different philosophical approach to bringing a person to the end of life.
I think Amy will say similar things. I know in my interviews with doulas, it's been really wonderful to talk to an end-of-life doula who is working with hospice or a physician who gets the end-of-life doula work and supports. But I've also interviewed end-of-life doulas who weren't so fortunate to have that experience. And so there can be some contested ground there about what the doctor wants, what falls within medical protocols for hospice, and the work that the end-of-life doula is actually trying to do. And doulas, I think in general, are very good at negotiating those tensions. And they understand that it's just part and parcel of the work that they do, and that this is something that most of the general public has no idea what they do or what an end-of-life doula is. So,
yeah, I think most of the doulas we talked with who had worked with medical professionals on a variety of levels, right? Doctors, nurses, also hospice care workers. The more those individuals understood and were educated about what end-of-life doulas are and do, saw it as a more symbiotic and supportive relationship, and were supportive. There were, a couple discussed sort of that there could sometimes be tensions if it felt like they were trying to take over, but it would quickly sort of explain. Doulas are really good at negotiating these tensions, like Jonelle said. And so if they were given sort of time and space to explain that their role was supportive and complementary to what the physician or nurse or hospice was trying to do, then that helped. A lot of times, end-of-life doulas would help in terms of explaining certain medical terminology, medical procedures. They could be there to just provide a different way of explaining things that needed to be explained to patients in a less stressful environment. And so they could be that conduit for, here are your options, and then that helps the patient make a more informed decision about how they might or might not want to move forward with certain types of treatment and what they really want.
It seems like to me that this would be a real good opportunity for a university with a medical school and maybe a divinity school to have some sort of training program that would pull together medical professionals and clergy professionals and end-of-life doulas and hospice workers together, creating a kind of unified approach. And maybe there are programs out there like that. I don't know. But anyway, so one of the questions I had that I've thought about since the last time we talked, does the work of a doula supplant the role of religion? Are doulas sought out by secular people who may not have a faith community to help them negotiate the end of life? Or do doulas complement a faith community? Or none of the above, or all of the above? Is there what kind of relationship exists between the work of doulas and the work of religious professionals?
I think it's definitely much like what we've talked about with the medical community. It's very supportive, it's supplemental. It's not meant to take the place of, if someone has a faith leader and an organized faith that they follow, then the doula is there to support that, and again, to ensure that their wishes are met. There are some of our doulas who've talked about individuals who've come to them because they're not practicing, like they might identify with a certain religion, but they don't participate in a weekly service or something like that. And so they're not currently attached to a faith community. And so the doula can provide that sort of support role. It's really kind of a whole host of different situations.
Do doulas bring sometimes, maybe always, a spiritual component to the process? Or does that depend on the individual doula or the individual client? Or
it's really driven by the client wishes and what the client wants. Doulas are very careful to say, this is not about what I think should happen, but rather this is your life, and how does my client want to reach the end of their life? What's important to them? And so whatever is important to them, doulas work to facilitate.
Yeah, so some of the questions I'm asking, I guess I'm asking you to generalize, and it's sounding more and more like every situation is unique, right? Because every person is unique, and I guess every death is unique. But could you maybe describe what a typical space would be like with a doula assisted death? You've mentioned a couple of times that one of the things a doula wants to do is to create a calm space. So what are some of the things that a doula might bring in to create that calm space? What would it be like? And would there be other people around and so forth?
In many cases, doulas work with their clients to, for example, create a book of memories, photos, special moments that bring the client great joy in helping to put that together, but also provide a legacy for family members after the client has died. I've interviewed several doulas who've talked about working with clients to identify their favorite music, and they want music playing in the background. They want identifying the key family members or friends that they would like to be there throughout the dying process. Some doulas sit and read to their clients, beloved books or poems. But in these cases, the doulas have actually worked with their clients to help identify what's important to them. What does the end of your life look like, and what kinds of things will bring you comfort and joy and peace? So that varies from client to client.
Yeah, and I think just to sort of add to that and round it out, I'm sorry that we keep saying like it's a highly individualized process and it sort of depends and it's all of those things, but it really is. And I think some of our doulas talked about that, their clients were part of larger families who when they wanted it to be everyone in the room, everyone having a great time. And that's what the dying person wanted at the end of life. They didn't necessarily want like candles and a peaceful environment. For them, a peaceful environment was having everyone around and laughter and sharing memories and things like that. I had a couple doulas that I talked with who spoke about the dying person being so concerned about their family members being able to sort of deal with the grief of the passing, that they actively did not want them present at the time of death. And it was a means to spare the family members of what that might be like for them. And so the doula being able to then have conversations with the family members and to help them understand sort of where that is coming from, right, for the dying person. That's why it is so individualized. Most of our doulas had a wide range of training in terms of some use sound therapy as part of their work, some use healing touch or Reiki as part of their work. if the client wants those things. But they really have kind of, most of them had a wide variety of services that they could provide depending on what the client wanted.
And I think if there are any generalizations here, it seems to me that the doulas I've interviewed, and I think this is true for Amy too, in working with clients are far more concerned about the family members that they are leaving behind than they are about themselves as they go through this process. That for most people who are dying, they've already come to a point of resolution, and they understand that they are dying. And so now they can turn their attention and their focus on the family members that they are leaving behind.
Wow.
And doulas work to, allay the concerns that the dying person has, and to make sure family members know that, your mom or your dad has consistently been concerned about you. He or she is okay.
That's powerful. Yeah.
Yes, it's very powerful.
So I've heard you to, and this goes back to one of your first comments about having a good death. I've heard you use the phrase death positive movement. And a couple of the things that happen in a death positive movement is death cafes and death dinner parties. Can you describe what that is? Because that's a new one for me.
Well, I can talk about the death dinner parties, and these are more or less like potluck gatherings with people who are interested in exploring options for end of life. So everyone gathers. In this case, it was at the home of one of the end of life doulas, and they have wine and good food, and they just begin to talk about what they envision the end of their life looking like. And then that, of course, morphs into discussions about what's important. How do I want to be remembered? And so it's a place and a way to talk about what we typically don't talk about in day-to-day life. We live in a culture that says you die and 3 to 7 days later, people are going to gather, there's going to be a service, and then you're going to be buried, and then everybody goes back to their day-to-day life. And so for people who are interested in exploring other options, this provides a great arena for asking questions and really doing some soul searching and deep thinking about, how do I want to be remembered? What do I want the end of my life to look like?
And I think,
go ahead.
Sorry, I was just to sort of add to that. I think sometimes because our culture is so uncomfortable with talking about death positive movement is really just about having a space, and usually it takes place as part of death cafes where people gather for coffee, or these death dinners where they gather over a meal. And it's just a place to have really open conversations and ask questions. Like, have you ever thought about whether this is what happens after you die? Or my faith tradition says this, but sometimes I question and wonder if it's this. And it's just because people are uncomfortable talking about it and are afraid of being seen as really morbid, or perhaps for questioning their belief system and what, religious text, whatever relevant religious text might say about what happens after death. People just want a space to be able to explore that and ask questions and sort of come to their own terms, whatever those are. And to think that it's okay to talk about it and to explore, do I want to be cremated? Do I want to be buried? Do I want a green burial? Do I want, what do I want? Do I want to donate my body to science?
Yeah.
And also, I think for most people, there's really no reason to have the knowledge of you know, what happens when my loved one dies? Do I immediately have to call the coroner? No, you don't. You're allowed to sit with that person's body, to maybe bathe that body before whatever funeral preparation the person has decided on. So it's a place to ask these kinds of questions and gain the kind of knowledge that people desire to make an informed decision about the end of their own lives.
It sounds very affirming and maybe even liberating.
Mhm.
So in the little bit of time we have left, I know you're not finished working professionally with doulas and the death positive movement. So what are your future plans and directions for this fascinating area of research?
So our initial stage was to speak with doulas for a variety of reasons. One was we know that their work and their clientele is sort of closely guarded and protected by them, rightfully so, right? They're very protective of their clients and their family members, particularly in these really sensitive situations with a dying person. So we wanted to talk with them first and gain information, gain a better understanding, and also build their trust. We wanted them to be able to see how we would write about their experiences before we reached out to say, we would also like to speak with dying persons and their family members so that we have a full understanding of this doula's experience and why they come to this work and why they do this work. And now we want to know the benefits for dying persons and their family members. How do they view working with a doula, so that we had a really well-rounded picture?
So you bring in the family members more with your study and your interviews. Well, I'm yeah.
In the future, we haven't yet.
In the future, right? Okay. Well, I will look forward to seeing the future direction of your work, and I thank you for this work. It seems so important to me, and it's very interesting. And we will have you back as you continue to work with doulas, the family members of those who are going through the process of death, and see what else you can find out about this very important work. And I thank you for coming back and appearing. You're among a select few who have come back for a second appearance on Religion and Life. So I appreciate your willingness to do that.
We are very appreciative of the opportunity.
Thank you.
We've enjoyed it. Thanks so much for having us.
Yep.
Great. And thank you for joining us on Religion and Life. I hope you'll join us on AppTV next time, when my guest will be Dr. Grant Wacker, and we'll talk with him about his latest book on Billy Graham. Until then, this is Ozzie Oswalt.